Hey guys, Bartel's Bookshelf here, back with another video for Roy's event, Giant Ape-ril. I'm sorry it's taken me a while to get to this. I've been in a little bit of a reading slump and it's been tough for me to find motivation to film, but I'm here now, and today I'm going to be talking about Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again by Shigeru Kayama, translated by Jeffrey Angles. These are translations of the two novellas that were novelizations of the first two movies that were written by Shigeru Kayama, who was the original sort of scenarist for the Godzilla movies. He helped create the character and kind of flesh out the story into what became the original film. And yeah, it was really cool when I found out about these. I never knew these existed, and they weren't available in English until now, although there were some fan translations that I found out about. It was interesting for me coming to this because I'm not as much of a Godzilla fan as I am a King Kong fan. I've seen the original Godzilla, and I've seen a few of the sequels here and there, like Godzilla Final Wars was a lot of fun. I've watched all of James Rolfe's Godzilla-thon videos back, from Monster Madness, if anybody remembers those. So I'm aware of Godzilla, and I know he's got a huge fan base, but I just personally never got into him as much as I did King Kong. I was never much of a kaiju person in general, but I thought it would be interesting to give this a try, especially because Aaron already bought this for me back in November, just because he ran across it online and it sounded interesting. So yeah, I've never actually seen Godzilla Raids Again, so I haven't even seen the second movie that this is based on, but I have seen the first movie, and to be honest, coming at these outside of the Godzilla fandom as someone who's not overly connected to Godzilla, I didn't really dig these all that much. Sorry. But basically, we all know the story of Godzilla, right? He's a monster that was, released from somewhere under the sea after hydrogen bomb testings. And the original film is a classic, deservedly so. It has this great noirish atmosphere. It's very dark and serious and intentionally evokes scenes from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Very, very powerful stuff, and obviously led to this huge media franchise. But these novellas I found sort of lacking because they're written for children. They were originally written as part of a series of children's novels that were published by Toho's publishing arm, I believe. And they kind of feel that way. The language in them is very simplistic, and Shigeru Kayama kind of overly explains things. And there's a ton of onomatopoeias, which is really strange. Godzilla's always constantly going groar, and there's lots of like pop, pop, and explosions and things like that. And it almost gives it the feeling of like a comic book, which the translator talks about in the afterword. I love the original movie. As I said, I think it's very powerful. And the novella has some of that, obviously, because it's Shigeru Kayama's story, and it's his thing. But I think perhaps maybe as the nature of the audience that he was writing this for, it's very simplified, and it's over very quickly. The Godzilla novella is only about 111 pages, and because of the way it's written, it's very much focused on like the immediate action. There's not a lot of like introspection on the parts of the characters, and because of the way that it's written, there really isn't any of the kind of mythic resonance that the film has, and that kind of dark, dramatic heft. There's a lot of scenes in the book that are in the film, like the choir of little girls singing at the very end of towards the end of the movie, and it's in the movie it's very like haunting and moving, and in the book it's just kind of there. Godzilla doesn't nearly have the same amount of like majesty and terror that he has on screen. Yeah, I don't know. I just found this wanting very much so, and I don't know if that's just because, like I said, of the audience that he was writing for or what. But and as for Godzilla Raids Again, I mean, to be honest, I just thought it was boring. Again, I haven't seen the film that it was based on, but I assume it's pretty faithful. I looked up on the Godzilla wiki afterward to kind of get a sense of what it was like and everything. And from what I gathered, it's pretty faithful to the movie. I planned to rewatch the original movie and watch the second movie after finishing this, but I just haven't had time. I've been so busy with work. I do want to check them out eventually. But yeah, Godzilla Raids Again, it felt very much like just a slapdash sequel that was put together to get Godzilla back in theaters because the original movie was such a massive hit. And from what I've read of the second movie, it was kind of put together that way in the first place, and that definitely comes through in the novella. I mean, if the original novella, was missing a lot of the same majesty and emotional resonance that the film had, the novella doesn't have anything. The Godzilla Raids Again novella is like 75, 80 pages. It's lightning paced. There's a ton of characters, and none of them really get any development to the point where I couldn't tell who was who. There are all these different names being thrown at you, and none of them were really defined in any unique way, except for one guy who is obsessed with getting married, and he's only obsessed with getting married because he gets tragically killed at the end of the story, and that's supposed to be our big moment of like, oh, he never got to find a woman, and that's really his one defining character trait. And Godzilla, the method that Godzilla is brought back just feels really cheap and lazy. As I said, very much the product of a sequel being rushed out to market, which this was from what I've heard about it. And again, like the writing, it's just so simplistic. It's very much like she did this, he did that, he went over here and grabbed this thing, Godzilla was doing this, and there's just a lot of these weird asides. Like in the first novella, there's this whole paragraph explaining what a flamethrower is, I guess because, again, this was written for younger audiences. They probably, maybe back then especially, didn't know what a flamethrower was, and they would have needed that explanation. But to me, it just kind of took me right out of the story. And in the case of the sequel, it really just amounts to a bunch of crashing and fighting, and, it's just very, like, dull and drab, and there's no real like life or energy or zest to any of it. I mean, the Godzilla films, at least from what I've seen of them, for all their faults, they do have a lot of like energy and verve to them. Especially with the monster fights. That's kind of what the whole series is really kind of based on. Monsters fighting, big monsters fighting each other. That's like the whole. The part and parcel of that whole franchise, but you don't really get a sense of that in here. It just feels very much as if Kayama watched the film and then kind of just dutifully transcribed everything that was going on, but there's really no life to any of it. I wasn't really excited. It wasn't visually arresting in any way. Honestly, I just thought this whole thing was just really disappointing. I'm really sorry to say. One thing that I did really appreciate about this that kind of like saved the whole thing for me was there's an extensive afterword in the back that's all about, it's written by Jeffrey Angles called Translating an Icon. And it's all about the history of Godzilla and of Shigeru Kayama and his place in the Godzilla saga. And it goes and it puts Godzilla into its proper historical context, explaining how the movie was made, how the novels were written. It talks about his experiences translating the novels and some of the issues that he ran into, and that was all really, really interesting. In fact, I actually learned some things that I didn't know, like the fishing ship that's destroyed at the beginning of the original film was inspired by a real thing that happened in 1952, where a series of nuclear tests off of the Bikini Atoll drifted 90 miles away onto a Japanese fishing boat, and everyone on the ship died of radiation sickness. Things like that, if you were a Japanese audience member back then and you saw the movie, you would know exactly what it's referring to, even if it doesn't explicitly say what it is. Things like that were really interesting. Probably not anything new. If you're a hardcore Godzilla fan, you probably know all of this stuff already, but for me, I thought it really kind of saved these novellas by putting them into their historical and cultural context and kind of helping you understand where Godzilla came from, as a metaphor, as a creative thing, as a symbol. I thought that was all really, really interesting, and honestly, I really think that's the only type of person that this would appeal to. If you're really into Godzilla, like if you love Godzilla more than anything, and I know like Godzilla fans are dedicated, and I hope I don't piss any of them off with this video. I don't have a problem with Godzilla. I enjoy Godzilla. It's just not my favorite franchise, But for me personally, I just thought this was kind of like, I can just go watch the movies and enjoy those. It is really cool as a historical document to have this. That was the main thing that I really appreciated about it, just as a piece of the history of this great franchise and of this, pop culture icon. I think it's really important, and I'm glad that we finally have it available in an official English translation. But just looking at it objectively as a story, as a book, it just left me feeling very meh. Just very uninspired and unmoved, which is not at all what the original film made me feel. The original film is dark and noirish and powerful, and I really think it's a deserved classic, and you can see how it led to this massive franchise, you know? But for me, the original novella didn't really carry any of that, and the second one was just boring, in my opinion. So, I don't know. I had very mixed feelings about this. But again, if you are a big fan of Godzilla, you would probably enjoy this as sort of a historical footnote, if nothing else. And I also thought the afterword was really interesting, although, as I said, if you are a big Godzilla fan, it probably isn't going to tell you anything you don't already know. Although there was one interesting bit in regards to the translation that Jeffrey Angles talked about, in that Godzilla is never explicitly defined as male. In fact, from what I understand, a lot of the Japanese language doesn't use gendered pronouns and things like that. But of course, society and the world at large, we classically think of Godzilla as male, so he's referred to as male in the book. But they talk about this sort of they talk briefly about this aspect of sort of queering Godzilla, treating Godzilla as this gender bending entity, which I thought was really interesting and not something that I'd ever heard or thought of before. So that was kind of interesting. So there were some things that I found useful and interesting about this book, but overall, unless you're a crazy, massive Godzilla fan, I don't know if I would recommend it. I would check out the afterword if you're interested, if you want to learn some things, but again, you could probably find a lot of that stuff out on your own just through research. And on the back of the book, there's actually some quotes from authors who wrote some nonfiction books about Godzilla. There's a quote here from William Tsutsui, author of Godzilla on My Mind, 50 Years of the King of Monsters, and a quote here from Steve Rifle, who's the co-author of Ishido Honda, A Life in Film from Godzilla to Kurosawa. Ishido Honda, of course, was the director of Godzilla and many of the other films in the series. So really, I might check those out because I think I would find those more interesting than this. But as I said, as a historical document, it's interesting, and I'm glad I read it. So yeah, that's my second and probably my final video for Giant Ape-ril. Again, I had a TBR plans, and I have some things that I might try to get to, some other novelizations like Monsterverse books and things like that. I don't know if I'll get to them, especially not till the end of April, because I've only got about a week left. But yeah, I just wanted to get this out and just sort of chat about it. And I also just wanted to take this opportunity to say, thank you to Roy from Roy Reads Anything for putting on and creating this event and getting people out of their comfort zones and getting us to think about sort of the mythic resonances of these giant monsters and why we love them and why these stories are constantly told about them. That's what I love about experiencing books and booktube and stepping outside of my comfort zone. So thank you for being the nudge that I needed to finally do that. So but yeah, until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye.